My name is Margaret Lee, and I have lived most of my 70 years in the same quiet neighborhood on the north side of Seattle. My house, a modest two-story with faded blue shutters and a garden that has always been more ambitious than successful, sits on a tree-lined street where the mailman still greets you by name, and neighbors wave from their porches. I have been a widow for nearly 2 decades, and though the ache of loss never truly disappears, I found a certain peace in the routines of my day's morning coffee in the kitchen, tending to my roses, and the gentle hum of the city beyond my window. My children, Anna and Daniel, are grown now, each with lives of their own. But the echoes of their childhood laughter still linger in these rooms, woven into the very fabric of the home I built for them. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring when I first noticed something odd. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was sorting through the week's mail at the kitchen table, sunlight slanting across the envelopes and bills. I have always prided myself on being careful with money, a habit born from years of stretching every dollar to keep the family afloat after my husband passed. I keep a small notebook in the drawer by the fridge where I jot down every expense, every check written, every automatic payment scheduled. It is a habit that brings me comfort, a sense of control in a world that so often feels unpredictable. That morning, as I logged into my online banking to pay the utility bill, a string of unfamiliar charges caught my eye. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, perhaps a glitch in the system, or a delayed posting from a previous purchase. But as I scrolled through the list, my heart began to beat a little faster. There were airline tickets to Honolulu, a reservation at a luxury hotel in Waikiki, and several large payments to companies I did not recognize. The amounts were staggering thousands of dollars, all within the past week. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, a sensation I had not felt in years, not since the days when every unexpected expense threatened to upend our fragile stability. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I have always been careful with my cards, never sharing my information, never clicking on suspicious links. The only person who has ever had access to my credit card, aside from myself, is Anna. Years ago, when she was in college and struggling to make ends meet, I added her as an authorized user, just in case of emergencies. She promised she would only use it if she truly needed help. And for a long time, she kept that promise. But Anna is 28 now, living with her fiancé in a trendy apartment downtown. And I had assumed she no longer needed that safety net. I tried to recall the last time I had spoken to Anna about money. It must have been months ago, during one of our Sunday lunches, when she mentioned saving up for a trip with Ethan, her fiancé. She had sounded so proud, so independent. And I remember feeling a quiet satisfaction that she was finally learning to stand on her own. I wanted to believe that she had outgrown the need for my help, that she was building a life for herself, brick by brick, just as I had once done. But now, staring at the evidence on my screen, I felt a creeping sense of doubt. I closed the laptop and pressed my hands to my temples, willing myself to stay calm. It was possible. I told myself that there was a simple explanation. Perhaps Anna had used the card by mistake, or maybe she had meant to pay me back and simply forgotten. I did not want to jump to conclusions, to let suspicion cloud my judgment. I have always believed in giving my children the benefit of the doubt, in trusting them to do the right thing. But as I sat there, the numbers on the screen seemed to mock my faith. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, watering the garden, folding laundry, preparing a simple dinner for one, but my mind kept circling back to those charges. I replayed every conversation I had had with Anna in recent weeks, searching for clues I might have missed. Had she seemed anxious? Had she hinted at financial trouble? I could not recall anything out of the ordinary. But then again, Anna has always been good at hiding her worries. She is like me in that way. Proud, stubborn, unwilling to ask for help until the situation is dire. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the house grew quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, copying down each suspicious charge. I told myself it was just a precaution, that I would call the bank in the morning and clear everything up. But deep down, I knew that something had shifted. The trust I had always placed in Anna felt suddenly fragile, as if a hairline crack had appeared in the foundation of our relationship. I did not sleep well that night. I lay awake, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the creak of the old house settling around me. My mind raced with possibilities: identity theft, a clerical error, or something more personal. I thought of Anna as a little girl, her hand tucked in mine as we crossed the street, her laughter ringing out as she chased Daniel through the park. I remembered the promises I had made to her, the sacrifices I had endured to give her a better life. I wanted to believe that she would never betray my trust, that she understood the value of what I had given her. But as the hours slipped by, doubt gnawed at the edges of my certainty. The next morning, I rose before dawn, unable to shake the sense of unease. I made a pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sky lighten from indigo to pale blue. I knew I could not ignore the problem, could not simply hope it would resolve itself. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. After breakfast, I gathered my notes and sat down at the computer, determined to trace every transaction, every detail, until I understood exactly what had happened. I started with the airline tickets. The reservation was in Anna's name, booked just 3 days earlier. The hotel, a five-star resort on the beach, was scheduled for the same dates. There were charges for spa treatments, fine dining, and even a private helicopter tour. The total, when I added it all up, was more than $20,000, an amount that made my hands tremble as I wrote it down. I could not imagine Anna spending that kind of money. Not without telling me. Not without a very good reason. I hesitated before picking up the phone. I did not want to accuse her, did not want to start a conversation with suspicion. I have always tried to be the kind of mother who listens first, who gives her children space to explain. But as I dialed Anna's number, my heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and hope warring inside me. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. She told me she was busy packing for her trip, excited about the adventure ahead. I listened, trying to keep my tone light, asking about her plans, the places she hoped to visit. She spoke of beaches and sunsets, of exploring new restaurants with Ethan, of making memories before the wedding. I wanted to be happy for her, to share in her excitement, but the numbers in my notebook weighed heavily on my mind. When I asked, gently, how she had managed to afford such a lavish vacation, Anna laughed and said she and Ethan had been saving for months. She mentioned a bonus Ethan had received at work, the extra shifts she had picked up at the boutique. Her answers were smooth, practiced, and for a moment, I almost believed her. But there was a hesitation in her voice, a flicker of uncertainty that I could not ignore. I did not press the issue. I told her I was proud of her, that I hoped she would have a wonderful time. We said our goodbyes, and as I hung up the phone, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I wanted to trust her, to believe that she was telling the truth, but the evidence in front of me told a different story. For the rest of the day, I moved through my routines in a daze. I watered the garden, though I could not remember if I had already done so. I folded laundry, my hands moving automatically, my mind elsewhere. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words blurred on the page. Every so often, I would glance at the notebook on the kitchen table, the list of charges staring back at me like an accusation. That evening, I called Daniel. My son has always been the steady one, the voice of reason in our family. He works as an engineer, lives with his wife and two children in a quiet suburb not far from here. We do not speak as often as I would like, but when we do, I always feel a sense of calm settle over me. I told him, as gently as I could, about the charges, about my conversation with Anna. He listened without interrupting, his voice calm and reassuring. He suggested I call the bank, check for fraud, and keep a close eye on my accounts. He did not say what I feared he was thinking, that Anna might have used my card without permission, but I heard the concern in his silence. After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen, the house quiet around me. I thought of all the years I had spent worrying about my children, all the nights I had lain awake, hoping they would make good choices, that they would be safe and happy. I realized, with a pang, that no matter how old they grew, I would never stop being their mother. I would never stop wanting to protect them, even from themselves. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I made a decision. I would not confront Anna directly, not yet. I would gather the facts, speak to the bank, and wait for the truth to reveal itself. I owed her that much. Owed myself the chance to be certain before I acted. But as I closed my notebook and turned off the kitchen light, I knew that something fundamental had changed. The trust that had always been the bedrock of our relationship now felt uncertain, as if a storm was gathering on the horizon, and I was powerless to stop it. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness that seemed to settle into my bones. The sky outside was a dull gray, the kind of Seattle morning that made the world feel smaller, quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I moved through my routine with a sense of purpose, but underneath it all was a current of unease that I could not shake. I made my coffee, watered the garden, and tried to focus on the ordinary details of the day, but my mind kept drifting back to Anna and the charges on my account. I knew I could not put off action any longer. The time for hoping things would resolve themselves had passed. After breakfast, I sat down at the kitchen table with my notebook and laptop, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. I opened my online banking again, this time with a sharper eye, and began to cross-reference every suspicious charge with my own records. I called the customer service number on the back of my card, my voice steady, but my hands trembling just a little as I explained the situation. The woman on the other end was polite and efficient, confirming that the charges had all been made online, using my card information, and that the reservations were indeed in Anna's name. There was no sign of a data breach, no evidence of outside fraud. The implication was clear, even if the words were never spoken aloud. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. The facts were lining up in a way I could no longer ignore. I sat for a long time, staring at the list of transactions, the numbers blurring together on the page. It was not just about the money, though the sum was significant. It was about the breach of trust, the realization that my daughter had crossed a line I never thought she would. I spent the rest of the morning gathering every piece of documentation I could find. I printed out the bank statements, highlighted the questionable charges, and made notes in the margins. I pulled out old emails and text messages, searching for any mention of the trip, any hint that Anna had planned to use my card. There was nothing. Every message was cheerful, casual, full of the small talk that fills the spaces between mothers and daughters who live separate lives. I found myself reading and rereading her words, looking for hidden meanings, for signs I had missed. But there was nothing to find. The truth was in the silence, in the things she had not said. By midday, I felt exhausted, as if I had run a marathon without ever leaving my chair. I made myself a sandwich and sat by the window, watching the rain begin to fall in soft, steady sheets. The world outside seemed distant, muffled by the weather and my own thoughts. I tried to remember the last time I had felt truly at ease, the last time I had believed, without reservation, in the goodness of my children. It was a painful realization, one that left me feeling older than my years. I knew I needed to talk to Anna, but I was not ready for a confrontation. I wanted to give her a chance to explain, to tell me her side of the story. I have always believed that people deserve the opportunity to speak for themselves, to be heard before they are judged, but I also knew that I could not let this go unaddressed. The stakes were too high, the damage too real. That afternoon, I called Anna again, my voice calm but my heart pounding. I asked her, as gently as I could, if she had used my card for her trip. There was a pause, just long enough to make my breath catch. And then she laughed, brushing off the question as if it were a joke. She told me not to worry, that everything was under control, that she and Ethan had saved up for months. I listened, searching her voice for any sign of guilt or fear, but she sounded just as she always did, confident, self-assured, a little impatient with my concern. I did not press the issue. I thanked her for her time and told her to enjoy her vacation. As I hung up, I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that she would come clean, that she would admit to what she had done and ask for forgiveness. Instead, she had chosen to lie, to protect herself at the expense of our relationship. It was a small betrayal, but it cut deeper than I expected. The next few days passed in a blur of routine and worry. I kept busy with chores, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of unease. I called the bank again, this time to put a temporary hold on my card, and made sure that no further charges could be made. I updated my passwords, checked my other accounts, and took every precaution I could think of. It was a strange feeling, this sense of vulnerability, as if the walls of my life had been breached and I was scrambling to shore them up before the damage spread. I spoke to Daniel again, this time with more urgency. I told him everything: the charges, the conversation with Anna, the steps I had taken to protect myself. He listened quietly, his voice steady and reassuring. He offered to help, to come over and look through the records with me, but I declined. I needed to do this on my own, to face the reality of what was happening without leaning on anyone else. It was not pride, exactly, but a sense of responsibility. I had raised my children to be independent, to solve their own problems, and now I felt I owed it to myself to do the same. In the evenings, I found myself replaying old memories, searching for the moment when things had changed. I thought of Anna as a child, her bright eyes and quick smile, the way she used to curl up beside me on the couch and ask for one more story before bed. I remembered the years when it was just the two of us, after my husband died, and how fiercely I had protected her from the world. I wondered if I had done too much, if I had made it too easy for her to rely on me, to expect that I would always be there to bail her out. It was a painful thought, one that I tried to push away, but it lingered at the edges of my mind. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and a cup of tea, the house silent around me. I made a list of every time I had helped Anna over the years: tuition payments, rent, car repairs, the little extras that add up over time. The total was staggering, far more than I had realized. I thought of Daniel, who had always insisted on paying his own way, who had never asked for more than he needed. The contrast was stark, and I felt a pang of guilt for not seeing it sooner. I knew I could not change the past, could not undo the choices I had made, but I could control what happened next. I resolved to keep a closer eye on my finances, to set firmer boundaries with my children, to protect myself, even if it meant risking their disappointment. It was not an easy decision, but it felt necessary. A way to reclaim some measure of control in a situation that had spiraled beyond my grasp. The following day, I received an email from the hotel in Waikiki, confirming the reservation in Anna's name and the payment made with my card. There was no room for doubt now, no way to explain it away as a mistake or a misunderstanding. I forwarded the email to myself, saving it with the rest of my documentation, and sat for a long time staring at the screen. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, as if the worst had already happened and all that was left was to deal with the consequences. I decided to reach out to my bank's fraud department, not to accuse Anna directly, but to make sure that my accounts were secure. The woman I spoke to was kind, her voice gentle as she walked me through the steps to protect my information. She asked if I wanted to file a formal report, but I hesitated. I was not ready to take that step, not ready to turn a family problem into a legal one. I thanked her and promised to call back if anything else happened. That evening, I sat in the living room, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. I thought about what it meant to be a mother, about the line between helping and enabling, about the ways love can blind us to the truth. I wondered if Anna understood the impact of her actions, if she realized how deeply she had hurt me. I wanted to believe that she did, that she was struggling with guilt and uncertainty, but I had no way of knowing. All I could do was wait and hope that she would find the courage to tell me the truth. As the days passed, I found myself growing more resolute. I began to see the situation not just as a personal betrayal, but as a turning point, a chance to set new boundaries, to redefine my relationship with my children. I knew it would not be easy, that there would be pain and anger and perhaps even estrangement, but I also knew that I could not go back to the way things were, could not pretend that nothing had happened. One afternoon, as I was sorting through the mail, I found a letter from Anna. It was short, just a few lines, thanking me for everything I had done for her and promising to pay me back for the trip. There was no apology, no explanation, just a vague assurance that she would make things right. I read the letter twice, searching for sincerity, for any sign that she understood the gravity of what she had done. But it felt hollow, a formality rather than a true attempt at reconciliation. I placed the letter in my file with the rest of the documentation and sat for a long time, staring out the window at the rain. I realized that I was waiting for something more, for an admission of guilt, for a real conversation, for the kind of honesty that could begin to heal the rift between us. Until that happened, I knew I would have to protect myself, to guard my heart as carefully as I guarded my finances. In the quiet of those days, I found a strange kind of strength. I began to see myself not just as a mother, but as a person with needs and boundaries of my own. I realized that love, no matter how deep, does not require me to accept betrayal or to ignore the truth. I could care for my children, support them, and still demand respect in return. It was a lesson I had learned too late, perhaps, but one I would not forget. I would not. As the week drew to a close, I felt a sense of clarity settle over me. I knew what I had to do next. I would continue to gather evidence, but paths to protect myself, and to wait for Anna to come to me with the truth. I would not chase her, would not beg for an explanation. The burden of honesty was hers to bear now. All I could do was hold my ground and trust that, in time, she would find her way back to me, not as a child in need, but as an adult willing to face the consequences of her actions. And so I waited, the days stretching out before me like a road I had never meant to travel. I did not know where it would lead or what I would find at the end. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I had done all I could to protect myself and the life I had built. The rest, I knew, was out of my hands. The days that followed were marked by a strange, almost clinical detachment. I moved through my routines with a sense of purpose, but it was as if I were watching myself from a distance, observing each action with a kind of quiet resignation. The rain continued to fall, sometimes in gentle drizzles, sometimes in heavy, relentless sheets that blurred the world outside my window. I found comfort in the monotony of daily chores, folding laundry, sweeping the kitchen floor, tending to the stubborn weeds in my garden. These small acts of order felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to as the ground shifted beneath my feet. It was during one of these gray mornings, as I sat at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, that I realized I could not simply wait for Anna to come to me. The evidence was clear, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing day. I had given her every opportunity to tell the truth, to reach out and explain, but she had chosen distance instead. I understood, in a way. Shame is a powerful thing, and the fear of disappointing someone you love can be paralyzing. Still, I knew I could not let this go unaddressed. The time had come to act not out of anger, but out of necessity. I began by making a series of quiet, deliberate phone calls. I contacted the hotel in Waikiki, my voice steady as I explained that the reservation had been made without my authorization. The woman on the other end was polite, her tone professional as she confirmed the details and explained the cancellation policy. There would be penalties. Of course, and some of the charges were non-refundable. But I accepted this as the price of reclaiming control. I asked her to send me written confirmation of the cancellation, and when the email arrived, I printed it and added it to my growing file of documentation. Next, I called the airline, the car rental agency, and the tour company that had arranged the helicopter ride. Each conversation was a test of my resolve, a reminder that I was not simply undoing a vacation, but unraveling a web of choices that had led us to this point. I spoke calmly, never raising my voice, never allowing emotion to seep into my words. I explained the situation, provided the necessary information, and accepted the consequences. Some companies were sympathetic, others less so. But in the end, the result was the same. One by one, the reservations disappeared, leaving only a trail of emails and receipts in their wake. With each cancellation, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. There was satisfaction in taking action, in asserting boundaries that had long been neglected. But there was also a deep, aching sadness, a sense of loss that went beyond the money or the ruined vacation. I thought of Anna, of the excitement in her voice when she spoke of her plans. And I wondered if she would ever understand why I had done this. I wondered if she would see it as an act of cruelty or as the painful but necessary consequence of her choices. Once the practical matters were settled, I turned my attention to the more difficult task of protecting myself for the future. I called my bank and requested that Anna be removed as an authorized user on my credit card. The process was straightforward, Bill, but the emotional weight of it was not. I remembered the day I had added her to my account, the sense of pride and trust I had felt, the hope that she would use the privilege wisely. Now, as I listened to the representative confirm the change, I felt a quiet grief settle over me, a mourning for the trust that had been broken, for the innocence that had been lost. I updated my passwords, set up new security alerts, and reviewed every account with a critical eye. It was tedious work, but it gave me a sense of agency, a way to reclaim some measure of control in a situation that had left me feeling powerless. I made a list of steps to take in the coming weeks, reviewing my will, consulting with my attorney, and considering changes to my estate plan. These were not decisions I'd ever imagined making under such circumstances, but I knew they were necessary. I could not afford to be naive. Not anymore. The first sign that Anna had discovered what I had done came in the form of a flurry of missed calls and text messages. I saw her name flash across my phone screen again and again, each time accompanied by a growing sense of dread. I did not answer. I was not ready for a confrontation, not ready to hear the anger or confusion in her voice. Instead, I let the calls go to voicemail, each one a silent testament to the distance that now separated us. Later that evening, as I sat in the living room with a book I could not focus on, the phone rang again. This time, I let it ring until the machine picked up, listening as Anna's voice filled the room. She sounded frantic, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of emotion. She demanded to know what had happened to her reservations, why her card was no longer working, why I had interfered in her plans. There was anger in her voice, but also fear, a vulnerability that I recognized all too well. I sat in silence at the weight of her words pressing down on me. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to explain that my actions were not meant to punish, but to protect. But I knew that any attempted explanation would be met with resistance and that she was not yet ready to hear the truth. I turned off the phone and sat in the quiet, letting the storm pass. The next morning, I found a series of messages waiting for me, some angry, some pleading, all demanding answers. I read them carefully, searching for any sign of understanding, any hint that Anna was willing to take responsibility for her actions. But the messages were filled with blame, with accusations of betrayal and control. She accused me of ruining her happiness, of meddling in her life, of treating her like a child. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a longing for the days when our conversations were filled with laughter and love, rather than anger and resentment. I did not respond. I knew that anything I said would only fuel the fire, that the time for words had passed. Instead, I focused on the practical matters at hand. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney, gathering the necessary documents and making a list of questions to ask. I reviewed my will and trust, considering what changes needed to be made to ensure that my wishes would be respected. It was a sobering process, one that forced me to confront the reality of my own mortality, but it also gave me a sense of peace. I was taking steps to protect myself, to safeguard the life I had built, even if it meant making difficult choices. As the days passed, the fallout from my actions began to ripple outward. I heard from friends and family members, some of whom had seen Anna's posts on social media. She had taken her grievances public, sharing her version of events with anyone who would listen. The stories were filled with half-truths and omissions, painting me as a controlling, vindictive parent who could not bear to see her daughter happy. I felt a wave of sadness as I read the comments, the judgments of strangers who knew nothing of the truth. It was a strange kind of pain, one that was both personal and impersonal, a reminder of how easily narratives can be twisted, how quickly trust can be eroded. I resisted the urge to defend myself, to set the record straight. I knew that any attempt to explain would only make things worse, that the people who mattered would see through the noise. Instead, I leaned on the support of those closest to me, Daniel, who called regularly to check in, and a few old friends who offered quiet words of encouragement. Their kindness was a balm, a reminder that I was not alone, even in the midst of turmoil. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up to see my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, standing at the gate with a concerned expression. She asked if everything was all right, mentioning that she had seen Anna and Ethan outside the house the night before, their voices raised in anger. I assured her that things were under control, thanking her for her concern. As she walked away, I felt a surge of gratitude for the small kindnesses that make up a community, the quiet ways in which people look out for one another, even when words are not enough. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. I thought about the choices I had made, the boundaries I had set, and the consequences that had followed. I wondered if Anna would ever understand, if she would ever see my actions for what they were, a final attempt to teach her the value of honesty, of responsibility, of respect. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be more pain before there was healing. But I also knew that I had done what I believed was right, even if it meant standing alone. In the quiet of that evening, I found a measure of peace. I watched the sky fade from gold to deep blue, the first stars appearing one by one. I thought of my husband, of the lessons we had tried to impart to our children, of the hopes we had carried for their futures. I wondered what he would have done in my place, what advice he would have given. I imagined him sitting beside me, his hand in mine, and offering the silent reassurance that comes from a lifetime of shared experience. As night fell, I gathered my things and went inside, locking the door behind me. I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make. But for now, I allowed myself to rest, to breathe, to trust that I had the strength to face whatever came next. The world outside was still uncertain, still filled with shadows and doubts. But within the walls of my home, I felt a quiet resolve take root, a determination to protect what mattered most, no matter the cost. The next morning, I woke to a sense of clarity. The storm had not passed, but I felt better equipped to weather it. I made a list of tasks for the day, follow up with my attorney, review my accounts, check in with Daniel. I moved through each item with a sense of purpose, refusing to let fear or regret dictate my actions. I reminded myself that boundaries are not acts of cruelty, but of love, that sometimes the most caring thing we can do is to say no, to insist on respect, to demand accountability. As the week unfolded, I watched from a distance as Anna struggled to adjust to the new reality. She and Ethan were forced to find alternative accommodations, their plans unraveling in the face of unexpected obstacles. I heard through mutual friends that they were staying in a modest motel, far from the luxury they had envisioned. There were complaints about the conditions, about the inconvenience, about the unfairness of it all. I listened, but I did not intervene. I knew that this was a lesson Anna needed to learn on her own, that no amount of comfort or reassurance from me would change the facts. In the evenings, I found solace in small rituals, watering the plants, reading by the fire, writing in my journal. I allowed myself to grieve the loss of innocence, the shattering of illusions. But I also celebrated the strength I had discovered within myself. I realized that I was not defined by my children's choices, that my worth was not measured by their approval. I could love them fiercely, but I could also protect myself, set limits, and demand respect. One night, as I sat by the window watching the rain, I thought about the future. I wondered what kind of relationship I would have with Anna, whether we would ever find our way back to each other. I hoped that, in time, she would come to understand the reasons behind my actions, that she would see them not as punishments, but as invitations to grow. I knew that forgiveness would not come easily, that trust would have to be rebuilt brick by brick. But I also knew that I was willing to wait, to hold space for the possibility of reconciliation, even as I guarded my own heart. The days grew longer, the rain giving way to tentative sunshine. I found myself looking forward to the changing seasons, to the promise of new beginnings. I tended to my garden with renewed energy, planting seeds and pulling weeds, watching as life pushed its way through the soil. It was a reminder that growth is often slow, that healing takes time, that even the most battered landscapes can bloom again. As I closed my journal one evening, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. I had faced the truth, taken action, and survived the fallout. I had learned to trust myself, to honor my own needs, to stand firm in the face of disappointment. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I no longer feared it. I was ready to meet whatever came next, with open eyes and an open heart, trusting that I had the strength to endure, to forgive, and perhaps one day, and to heal. The days after Anna's failed vacation unfolded with a tension that seemed to settle over everything, a heaviness that pressed into the quiet corners of my home. I noticed the change in the air, the way even the smallest tasks felt weighted with a new significance. I moved through my routines, but there was a new edge to my solitude, a sense that the world outside my window was watching, waiting for the next development in a story that was no longer just mine. It was not long before I realized that Anna had taken her frustrations beyond the boundaries of our family. The first sign came in the form of a message from an old friend, someone I had not spoken to in years, who reached out to ask if I was all right. She mentioned seeing something on social media, a post from Anna that seemed to cast me in a harsh, unrecognizable light. I felt a chill as I read her words, a sense of foreboding that only deepened when I logged onto my own account and saw the flurry of activity. Anna had written a long, emotional post, accompanied by photos from the airport and the modest motel where she and Ethan had ended up. She described her disappointment, her anger, and her sense of betrayal, painting a picture of a mother who had sabotaged her happiness out of spite or control. The comments poured in: friends, acquaintances, even strangers offering sympathy, encouragement, and advice. Some urged her to cut ties, others to stand up for herself. And a few, more cautious, suggested that there might be another side to the story. But their voices were drowned out by the chorus of outrage, the collective judgment of people who knew nothing of the truth. I read the post twice, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a strange experience, seeing myself through Anna's eyes, or at least through the version of me she had chosen to share with the world. I recognized some of the details, twisted and reframed, but much of it felt foreign, as if she were describing a stranger. I wondered if she truly believed what she had written, or if she was simply trying to make sense of her own pain by assigning blame. Either way, the effect was the same. The rift between us, once private and contained, had become a spectacle for public consumption. In the days that followed, I received a steady stream of messages, some supportive, others accusatory, many simply curious. I found myself fielding questions from people I barely knew, their words laced with judgment or concern. Even my neighbors seemed to look at me differently, their greetings tinged with a new wariness. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I had not anticipated. It was one thing to endure conflict within the family, another entirely to have it dissected and debated by outsiders. I resisted the urge to respond, to defend myself, or set the record straight. I knew that any attempt to explain would only add fuel to the fire, that the people who mattered would see through the noise. Still, the silence was difficult to maintain. I wanted to reach out to Anna, to ask her why she had chosen this path, to remind her of the love and trust that had once bound us together. But I knew that such a conversation would be futile, that she was not ready to hear my side, not yet. Instead, I turned inward, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms of my life. I spent more time in the garden, my hands in the soil, the simple act of nurturing life offering a kind of comfort that words could not. I found myself reflecting on the nature of forgiveness, on the ways in which love can both heal and wound. I wondered if Anna would ever come to understand the reasons behind my actions, if she would ever see them as an invitation to grow rather than a punishment to be endured. The public nature of our conflict brought new challenges. I noticed a subtle shift in the way people interacted with me, a hesitancy that had not been there before. Some friends grew distant, their calls and visits less frequent, while others rallied around me, offering quiet support and understanding. I was grateful for their presence, for the reminders that I was not alone, even as I navigated the storm of judgment and misunderstanding. One afternoon, as I was returning from the grocery store, I encountered Ethan in the parking lot. He looked tired, his face drawn and tense, and for a moment I saw in him the same uncertainty that haunted Anna. He did not speak, but his eyes lingered on me, searching for something, perhaps an apology, perhaps an explanation. I offered a polite nod and continued on my way, unwilling to engage in a confrontation that would solve nothing. At home, I found myself replaying the events of the past weeks, searching for the moment when things had gone irreparably wrong. I thought of the years I had spent nurturing my children, the sacrifices I had made, the hopes I had carried for their futures. I wondered if I had failed Anna in some fundamental way, if my efforts to protect her had somehow stunted her growth, made her less resilient in the face of disappointment. It was a painful thought, one that lingered in the quiet hours of the night. As the days passed, the intensity of the public scrutiny began to wane, replaced by a quieter, more persistent ache. The world moved on, as it always does, but the wounds remained. I found myself longing for resolution, for a conversation that would bridge the gap between us. But I knew that such healing could not be forced. It would come, if at all, in its own time, on its own terms. In the meantime, I focused on the practical matters that still demanded my attention. I met with my attorney, reviewed my estate plan, and made the necessary changes to ensure that my wishes would be respected. The process was sobering, a reminder of the impermanence of life and the importance of preparing for the future. I felt a sense of relief as I signed the documents, a quiet confidence that I was doing what needed to be done, even if it was not what I had once imagined. Daniel remained a steady presence, his calls and visits a source of comfort and reassurance. He listened without judgment, offering advice only when asked, and never once questioned my decisions. I was grateful for his support, for the reminder that family, though sometimes fractured, could still offer strength and stability. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set, I received a message from Anna. It was brief, almost perfunctory, a simple acknowledgement of the changes I had made to my will and trust. She did not ask for an explanation, nor did she offer an apology. Instead, she accused me of abandoning her, of choosing Daniel over her, of valuing money more than love. I read her words with a heavy heart, recognizing the pain and confusion that lay beneath the anger. I wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but I knew that any attempt at reconciliation would be premature. She needed time to process her feelings, to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. In the quiet that followed, and I found myself reflecting on the nature of boundaries, on the ways in which love can both protect and constrain, I realized that setting limits was not an act of rejection, but an expression of care, a way of teaching my children to stand on their own, to take responsibility for their choices. It was a lesson I had learned the hard way, but one I hoped Anna would come to understand in time. The weeks slipped by, each day bringing a new sense of normalcy. The garden flourished under my care. The house grew quieter, and I found myself settling into a new rhythm. I missed Anna, missed the closeness we had once shared. But I also recognized the importance of giving her space, of allowing her to find her own way. I trusted that, in time, she would come to see the truth of my actions, that she would recognize the love that had guided my decisions, even when it was difficult to accept. As summer deepened, I found myself looking forward to the future with a sense of cautious optimism. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be setbacks and disappointments. But I also believed in the possibility of healing. I held on to the hope that one day, Anna would return not as a child in need, but as an adult ready to face the world on her own terms. For now, I focused on the present, on the small joys that filled my days, the warmth of the sun on my face, the scent of blooming roses, the laughter of children playing in the distance. I allowed myself to grieve the losses, to celebrate the victories, and to trust in the resilience of the human heart. The story was not over. Not yet. There was still time for forgiveness, for understanding, for love to find its way back home. The weeks after I finalized the changes to my will and trust passed with a strange sense of anticipation, as if I were waiting for a storm that had not yet broken. I had done what I believed was necessary, not out of anger or spite, but from a place of self-preservation and hard-won wisdom. The legal documents were signed, the instructions clear, and for the first time in months, I felt a measure of security return to my life. Yet beneath that calm, I knew there would be consequences, reactions that would ripple through the fragile fabric of my family. It was a late afternoon when the inevitable confrontation arrived. I was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off, and then the front doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I wiped my hands on a towel and moved to the entryway, my heart steady but my mind alert. Through the glass, I saw Anna and Ethan standing on the porch. Anna's posture was rigid, her face set in a mask of determination, while Ethan hovered just behind her, his expression unreadable. I opened the door, greeting them with a calm I did not entirely feel. Anna wasted no time with pleasantries. She stepped inside, her voice tight as she demanded to know why I had cut her out and what I hoped to accomplish by humiliating her in front of everyone. Ethan followed, his presence looming, as if he were there to back her up or perhaps to intimidate me into changing my mind. I closed the door behind them, feeling the weight of the moment settle over us. The conversation that followed was tense, each word carefully chosen, each accusation met with a measured response. Anna's anger was palpable, but beneath it, I sensed a deep hurt, a confusion that she could not quite articulate. She spoke of betrayal, of feeling abandoned, of being treated as if she were a child who could not be trusted. Ethan, for his part, interjected with pointed remarks about fairness and family loyalty, his tone growing sharper as the discussion wore on. I listened, letting them speak, refusing to be drawn into a shouting match. When it was my turn, I explained my decisions as plainly as I could. I told Anna that trust, once broken, could not be restored with apologies alone, that actions had consequences, and that I had a responsibility to protect myself and the life I had built. I reminded her that love did not mean enabling harmful behavior, that boundaries were not punishments but necessary lines drawn out of care for both of us. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, unwilling to show weakness. Ethan's frustration simmered just below the surface, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, I wondered if the conversation would devolve into something uglier, but instead, a silence settled between us, a silence filled with all the things we could not say. Eventually, Anna turned away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She accused me one last time of choosing Daniel over her, of valuing money more than family. And then she left, Ethan trailing behind her. I watched from the window as they drove away, the car disappearing down the street, leaving behind a quiet that felt both liberating and unbearably sad. In the aftermath, I found myself replaying the encounter, searching for signs that I might have handled things differently. I wondered if there was a gentler way to have delivered the truth, a softer path that might have spared us all some pain. But each time I traced the conversation in my mind, I returned to the same conclusion: I had done what was necessary, not just for myself, but for Anna as well. She needed to learn that love was not a blank check, that respect was earned, not demanded. The days that followed were marked by a new kind of silence. Anna did not call, nor did she send any more messages. The house felt emptier than before, the absence of her voice a constant reminder of what had been lost. I filled the hours with small tasks: organizing old photographs, tending to the garden, writing letters I never intended to send. I found comfort in the routines, in the knowledge that I had reclaimed a measure of control over my life. Yet even as I settled into this new normal, I could not ignore the undercurrent of grief that ran through everything. There were moments when I missed Anna fiercely, when I longed for the easy laughter and shared confidences of years past. I thought of the little girl she had once been, the child who had clung to my hand in crowded places, who had whispered secrets in the dark. I mourned the loss of that closeness, even as I recognized that it was not my responsibility to restore it alone. Daniel remained a steady presence, his support unwavering. He visited often, bringing his children to fill the house with noise and life. He never spoke ill of his sister, nor did he press me for details about the changes I had made. Instead, he offered quiet reassurance, a reminder that family could endure even the most painful ruptures. I was grateful for his kindness, for the way he respected my boundaries without question. As the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes in myself. The anxiety that had once gripped me loosened its hold, replaced by a cautious optimism. I found myself looking forward to the future, to the possibility of reconciliation, even if it seemed distant. I allowed myself to hope that Anna would one day come to understand the reasons behind my actions, that she would see them not as rejections, but as invitations to grow. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I received a letter from Anna. The envelope was plain, her handwriting familiar but hesitant. Inside, she wrote of her anger and confusion, of the pain she felt at being excluded, but also of a growing awareness that things could not continue as they had. She did not apologize, nor did she ask for forgiveness. Instead, she acknowledged the distance between us, the need for time and space to heal. I read her words slowly, letting them sink in. It was not the reconciliation I had hoped for, but it was a beginning, a small step toward understanding, a sign that she was willing to reflect on her own choices. I wrote back, keeping my response simple and honest. I told her that I loved her, that I would always be here if she wanted to talk, but that I could not undo the decisions I had made. I wished her well, hoping that she would find her own path, wherever it might lead. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The wounds were still fresh, the future uncertain, but I no longer felt trapped by regret or fear. I had faced the hardest truths, made the most difficult choices, and survived. I knew that healing would take time, that trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had realized. that I could endure loss and still find meaning in the life I had created. The world outside my window continued to turn, the seasons shifting from summer to fall. The garden bloomed and faded, the leaves turning gold and crimson before drifting to the ground. I found comfort in the cycles of nature, in the reminder that endings were also beginnings, that loss could give way to renewal. I tended to my plants, watched the birds return to the feeder, and allowed myself to hope for better days. As I moved through this new chapter, I carried with me the lessons of the past. I understood now that love was not about sacrifice without limits, that boundaries were not walls, but bridges, structures that allowed us to meet each other as equals, with respect and honesty. I hoped that Anna would come to see this too, that she would find her own strength and learn to stand on her own. For now, I focused on the present, on the small joys that filled my days. I cherished the laughter of my grandchildren, the warmth of Daniel's embrace, the quiet satisfaction of a well-tended garden. I allowed myself to grieve what had been lost, but I also celebrated what remained. The story was not over. Not yet. There was still time for forgiveness, for understanding, for love to find its way back home. And as I watched the sun set, painting the sky with colors I could never quite name, I felt a quiet hope take root, a belief that, in time, we would all find our way forward, together or apart. As autumn deepened, the air in Seattle grew crisp and the days shortened, the city's familiar drizzle returning with a steady rhythm. I found myself drawn to the window more often, watching the leaves swirl across the yard, their colors shifting from gold to russet before settling into the damp earth. There was a quietness to this season that suited my mood, a sense of things winding down, of nature preparing for rest, and of life moving forward whether or not we are ready. The world outside seemed to echo the changes within me, as if the city itself was gently urging me to let go of what had been and make space for what might come. In the weeks since Anna's letter, I'd settled into a new routine, one that felt both unfamiliar and necessary. I spent more time tending to the garden, pruning back the roses and planting bulbs for spring, the work grounding me in the present. I took long walks through the neighborhood, the chill in the air a welcome companion, and allowed myself to notice the small changes that marked the passage of time. The world outside was changing, and so was I. I found myself lingering in the kitchen in the early mornings, watching the steam rise from my tea, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the occasional call of a crow. There was a comfort in these simple rituals, a reassurance that life, in all its unpredictability, could still be shaped by my own hands. I heard little from Anna during this period. There were no phone calls, no unexpected visits, only the occasional message relayed through Daniel or a mutual friend. I learned, in bits and pieces, that she and Ethan had separated, that she had moved into a small apartment not far from her old neighborhood, and that she was working longer hours at the boutique. The news came to me quietly, without drama or demand, and I accepted it as another sign that she was finding her own way, however difficult the journey might be. Sometimes, I would pass by the street where her new apartment was located, not out of any desire to intrude, but simply to remind myself that she was nearby, living her life, making her own choices. There were moments when I ached to reach out, to offer comfort or advice, but I resisted the urge. I understood now that my role had changed, that Anna needed space to make her own choices, to learn from her own mistakes. It was not easy to let go, to watch from a distance as she struggled, but I reminded myself that this was the only way forward. Love, I had come to realize, sometimes meant stepping back rather than stepping in. I remembered the years when Anna was small, how I would watch her from the kitchen window as she played in the yard, resisting the urge to rush out every time she stumbled. It was a lesson in patience then, and it was a lesson in patience now. My days took on a gentle rhythm. I found solace in the rituals of daily life, brewing tea in the morning, reading by the fire in the evenings, writing in my journal when the house grew quiet. I allowed myself to reflect on the past, to acknowledge the pain and regret. But I also made room for gratitude. There was much to be thankful for Daniel's steady presence, the laughter of my grandchildren, the comfort of old friends who had weathered the storm by my side. I began to reconnect with neighbors I had neglected during the months of turmoil, accepting invitations for coffee or a walk in the park, rediscovering the small joys of community. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, I came across a picture of Anna as a child, her face lit with joy as she ran through the park, her hair wild in the wind. I held the image in my hands for a long time, remembering the years when everything seemed possible, when the future was a blank canvas waiting to be filled. I felt a pang of longing for those simpler days, but I also recognized how far we had come, how much we had both grown. I placed the photograph on my desk, a quiet reminder that the bond between us, though strained, was not broken. It was during this time that I received a letter from Anna, written in her careful, looping script. She wrote of her new life, of the challenges she faced living alone, of the satisfaction she found in her work, of the small victories that marked her progress. She did not dwell on the past, nor did she ask for forgiveness. Instead, she spoke of learning to stand on her own, of discovering strengths she had not known she possessed. There was a humility in her words, a quiet acceptance of responsibility that I had not seen before. She described the pride she felt when she paid her own rent, the sense of accomplishment in managing her own finances, the unexpected comfort she found in solitude. Reading her letter, I felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. It was not an apology, nor was it a plea for reconciliation, but it was honest and unguarded. I sensed that Anna was beginning to understand the lessons I had tried in my imperfect way, and to teach her. She was building a life for herself, one that did not depend on my approval or support. And in that realization, I found a measure of peace. I noticed, too, a new gentleness in her words, a willingness to see me not just as her mother, but as a person with my own needs and boundaries. I wrote back, keeping my words simple and sincere. I told her that I was proud of her, that I admired her courage, and that I would always be here if she needed me. I did not press for more, did not ask for visits or phone calls. I left the door open, trusting that she would walk through it when she was ready. I slipped a photograph of her as a child into the envelope, a small gesture, hoping she would remember the love that had always been there, even when it was difficult to see. The weeks slipped by, each day bringing a new sense of normalcy. I watched as the garden settled into its winter rest, the last blooms fading beneath the first frost. I spent time with Daniel and his family, their presence a balm to the loneliness that sometimes crept in at dusk. I allowed myself to hope, quietly and without expectation, that Anna and I would find our way back to each other in time. I began to volunteer at the local library, helping children with their reading, finding joy in their curiosity and laughter. It was a way to give back, to fill the spaces in my life that had once been occupied by worry. There were setbacks. Of course, there were days when the silence between us felt heavy, when I questioned whether I had done the right thing, whether the boundaries I had set were too harsh. But those moments grew less frequent as the season wore on, replaced by a growing confidence in the choices I had made. I understood now that healing was not a straight path, that it required patience and faith in the process. I learned to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made, to accept that I could not control the outcome, only my own actions. As the holidays approached, I received a small package from Anna, a simple card, a photograph of her new apartment, and a note wishing me well. There was no mention of the past, no attempt to bridge the gap with grand gestures or apologies. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement of where we stood, a recognition that rebuilding trust would take time. I placed the card on the mantel, a reminder that even the smallest steps could lead to something more. I sent her a tin of homemade cookies, a tradition from her childhood, hoping it would bring a smile to her face. I spent the holidays surrounded by family and friends, the house filled with warmth and laughter. There were moments when I missed Anna's presence, when I wished things could be as they once were. But I also recognized the beauty in what remained. I cherished the connections that had endured, the love that had survived the storm. Daniel's children decorated the tree with ornaments Anna had made years ago, and I found myself telling stories of holidays past, weaving Anna's name into the fabric of our celebrations. As the new year dawned, I found myself looking forward with a sense of cautious optimism. I did not know what the future would hold, whether Anna and I would ever fully reconcile, but I was content to let things unfold in their own time. I had learned to trust in the resilience of the human heart, to believe that love, once given, was never truly lost. I made a list of small goals for myself: learn a new recipe, visit the art museum, write letters to old friends. Each day, I tried to do one thing that brought me joy, however small. In the quiet of winter, I tended to my garden, preparing it for the promise of spring. I watched the days grow longer, the light returning little by little, and I allowed myself to hope. I knew that healing would not come all at once, that it would require patience and forgiveness, both for Anna and for myself. But I was ready to meet whatever came next, with an open heart and an open mind. I began to dream again, to imagine possibilities for the future: a trip to the coast, a new book club, perhaps even a visit from Anna when she was ready. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, I saw Anna across the street, her arms full of groceries, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She did not see me, and I did not call out. But I watched her for a moment, marveling at the quiet confidence in her stride. She looked older, more self-assured, and I felt a surge of pride that was free of regret. I realized then that letting go had not meant losing her, but allowing her to become the person she was meant to be. The story was not over. There was still time for forgiveness, for understanding, for love to find its way back home. And as I stood at the window, watching the first snowflakes drift down from the sky, I felt a quiet certainty settle within me, a belief that, in the end, we would all find our way. Each in our own time, each in our own way. The door remained ajar, the light left on, a silent invitation for Anna to return whenever she was ready. Until then, I would wait, trusting in the slow, steady work of love and time. In the months that followed, Anna and I exchanged more letters, each one a little warmer, a little more open than the last. She wrote about her new friends, her favorite books, the satisfaction she found in mastering small challenges. I shared stories of my own days, the successes and failures of my garden, the antics of Daniel's children, the comfort I found in routine. Our words became a bridge, spanning the distance between us, allowing us to rebuild trust one sentence at a time. Spring arrived at last, the garden waking from its long sleep, crocuses and daffodils pushing through the soil. I invited Anna to join us for a family lunch, not knowing if she would accept. She arrived quietly, bringing a bouquet of tulips and a shy smile. The meal was simple, the conversation tentative at first, but as the afternoon wore on, laughter returned to the table, and I saw glimpses of the closeness we had once shared. After everyone had left, Anna lingered in the kitchen, helping me wash the dishes. She spoke of her plans for the future, her hopes and fears, her gratitude for the space I had given her to grow. I listened, my heart full, and realized that forgiveness had already begun, not as a single moment, but as a series of small choices, made day after day. As the sun set, casting a golden light across the garden, I walked Anna to the door. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. We stood together on the porch, watching the evening settle over the city, and I knew that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, each of us changed, but still bound by love. The seasons would turn again, bringing new challenges and new joys. But I was no longer afraid. I had learned that letting go was not the end, but the beginning of something new, a relationship built on honesty, respect, and the quiet courage to start again. The door would always be open, the light always left on, a testament to the enduring power of hope. And so, as the days grew longer and the world burst into bloom, I embraced the future with a heart made stronger by loss and healing. I welcomed Anna back into my life, not as the child she had been, but as the woman she had become. Together, we would write the next chapter of our story, trusting in the slow, steady work of love and time.